Captain Elias Vance stood on the observation deck of the Odyssey, his hands resting on the cool, transparent alloy railing. Below, the nebula, the weeping veil, stretched across the viewport, a tapestry of violet and crimson gas clouds that shimmered with the light of distant, dying stars. It was a breathtaking sight, one that had drawn the ultra-wealthy to this cruise liner for a once-in-a-lifetime journey. Vance, however, saw something more. He saw the raw, untamed power of the cosmos, a power humanity had only begun to comprehend. He was a relic, a man who remembered the days before the great artifacts, before humanity had learned to weave reality itself with the threads of creativity. His own grandfather had been one of the first to compose a reality chord, a symphony that could mend a fractured moon. Now, Vance commanded the Odyssey, a vessel that was less a ship and more a floating gallery, carrying priceless works of art that could, if mishandled, unravel the fabric of space-time. He sighed, the sound lost in the hum of the life support systems. His duty was to protect these treasures, to ensure that the power of human imagination was used for wonder, not for war. It was a heavy burden, one he had carried for decades. He watched a family of tourists, their faces illuminated by the nebula's glow, pointing and laughing. They had no idea of the fragile, magnificent power that surrounded them, a power that Vance was sworn to guard. He turned away from the view, his gaze falling on the ship's first officer, Lena Petrova, a woman whose sharp mind was as sharp as the blade of her ancestors' ceremonial sword. She stood near the ship's AI core, her brow furrowed in concentration as she monitored the energy signatures from the nebula. "Anything unusual, Lena?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. She shook her head, her dark hair catching the light. "Just the usual background radiation, Captain. Beautiful but quiet. Too quiet." Vance's instincts, honed by a lifetime of dealing with cosmic forces both beautiful and terrible, screamed at him that quiet was the most dangerous sound of all. Chief Engineer Grack's four arms moved in a blur of practiced motion, each one deftly manipulating a different tool on the main engineering console. His species, the Cthar, were renowned across the galaxy for their innate understanding of complex machinery, but Grack was a master even among his own kind. He had been contracted by the Odyssey's owners to oversee the installation of a new experimental drive, a device that promised to make interstellar travel as instantaneous as a thought. The Cthar were not a species of artists, they were engineers. They saw the universe not as a canvas for emotion, but as a series of intricate puzzles to be solved. Grack found human art baffling, a chaotic waste of resources. Why paint a picture when you could build a machine that paints 1,000 pictures at once? Yet, he had to admit, the sheer scale of the human creations on this ship was impressive. He had spent the last 3 cycles calibrating the ship's harmonic dampeners, a system designed to stabilize the reality-warping energies emanating from the art galleries. It was a delicate task, one that required a precision that even his kind rarely achieved. His third and fourth arms adjusted a series of crystalline resonators, while his first and second arms fine-tuned the energy conduits. The hum of the engines was a familiar song to him, a symphony of mechanics. He paused, his sensitive ears picking up a faint, discordant note from the primary drive. It was almost imperceptible, a subtle vibration that shouldn't be there. He frowned, his brow ridges knitting together. He ran a diagnostic, but the ship's AI reported no anomalies. Grack knew better. AI was good with data, but it lacked the intuitive grasp of machinery that was second nature to him. He decided to investigate personally, leaving his team of junior engineers to their tasks. He moved through the bustling engine room, a tower of muscle and fur, his gaze sweeping over the labyrinth of pipes and conduits. The discordant note grew louder as he approached the drive core, a low thrum that vibrated in his bones. Something was wrong, and he would find out what, no matter how deep he had to go into the machine. Lena Petrova stood in the main gallery, surrounded by what humans called the infinite canvas, a holographic display that shifted and changed in response to the emotions of the viewers. It was a masterpiece of interactive art, capable of rendering scenes from the artist's deepest memories or wildest fantasies. At that moment, it showed a serene forest bathed in golden light, a place of peace and tranquility. Lena, however, felt anything but tranquil. Her eyes were fixed on a small, flickering section of the display, a glitch in the otherwise perfect image. It was a tiny, jagged tear in the fabric of the hologram, a brief glimpse of the raw, chaotic energy that powered it. She had seen it before, a few hours ago, but it had vanished as quickly as it appeared. Now it was back, and it seemed larger. She called up the energy logs for the gallery, her fingers flying across the control panel. The readings were normal, but the visual evidence was undeniable. There was a flaw, a cancer in the system. She contacted Captain Vance, her voice tense. "Captain, you need to see this. The infinite canvas has a recurring anomaly." A few minutes later, Vance stood beside her, his expression grim as he watched the flicker. "It's not a glitch," he said, his voice low. "It's a resonance. Something is interfering with the harmonic frequency of the dampeners." Lena's eyes widened. "You think it's the nebula?" "No," Vance replied, shaking his head. "The nebula is too far away. This is coming from inside the ship." Before they could investigate further, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered, and the serene forest of the hologram dissolved into a storm of static and noise. Alarms blared to life, their shrill cry echoing through the gallery. "Report." Vance barked into his comms. "What was that?" From the bridge, a panicked voice replied. "Captain, we've lost main power to the aft sections. Engineering reports a catastrophic failure in the primary drive. It's tearing itself apart." Grak was thrown across the engine room as a massive surge of energy ripped through the primary drive. The console in front of him exploded in a shower of sparks, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burnt metal and ozone. He landed hard on the deck plates, the wind knocked out of him. He pushed himself up, his forearms bracing against the floor as the ship lurched again. The discordant note he had heard earlier was now a deafening roar, a scream of tortured metal and raw power. He saw the problem immediately. A cascade failure in the drive's containment matrix, caused by a microscopic fracture in a primary energy conduit. It was a flaw that should have been caught by the pre-flight diagnostics, but it was there, and it was growing. He scrambled to his feet, his movements swift and sure despite the chaos. His team was already scrambling, trying to regain control of the systems, but panic was setting in. Grak shoved them aside, his presence commanding silence. "No, stop," he roared, his voice cutting through the din. "You are making it worse." He assessed the situation in a matter of seconds. The containment field was collapsing, and the drive was about to go critical. There was only one way to stop it: a manual override, a physical severing of the main power conduit. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only option. He grabbed a heavy-duty plasma cutter from a tool locker, its weight familiar in his hands. "I need 2 volunteers to help me stabilize the conduit," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. 2 of his largest engineers stepped forward. Grak nodded. "Follow me, and move fast." He led them through the treacherous, sparking wreckage of the engine room toward the heart of the failing drive. The heat was intense, and the radiation alarms were screaming, but Grak didn't flinch. This was what he was built for, fixing the unfixable. Captain Vance rushed to the bridge, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and urgency. The Odyssey was adrift, crippled by the failure in engineering. The main view screen showed a terrifying sight. The primary drive had ejected a massive cloud of superheated plasma, which was now expanding rapidly, threatening to engulf the ship. "Status report," he commanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. The bridge crew scrambled to comply. "Hull integrity at 70% and falling, Captain. Life support is failing in decks 7 through 9. The plasma cloud is on an intercept course." Vance's mind raced. They needed to get the drive back online, or they needed to move, and fast. But with the drive in pieces, movement was impossible. He looked at the navigation officer, a young man named Finn, whose face was pale with fear. "Can we use the auxiliary thrusters to maneuver?" Finn shook his head. "Not enough power, Captain. We're sitting ducks." Vance's gaze fell on Lena, who had just arrived on the bridge, her face grim. "Lena, what about the art? Can we use any of the reality cords to stabilize the ship?" Lena hesitated, her eyes wide. "Captain, those are priceless artifacts. Using them as a weapon? It's unthinkable. The backlash could be catastrophic." "Unthinkable is better than dead," Vance replied, his voice hard. "We have to try." Is there anything we can use? Lena thought for a moment, her fingers tapping on her datapad. There is one piece. The anchor. It's a static reality cord, designed to stabilize gravitational fields. It's in the cargo bay, but it's incredibly powerful. If we could route its energy to the maneuvering thrusters, we might be able to push us out of the plasma's path. Do it, Vance ordered. Now. Grak and his team worked in a maelstrom of chaos. The primary drive was a screaming vortex of energy, and the heat was so intense that the alloy deck plates were beginning to glow. The conduit they needed to sever was deep within the drive's core, a place of unimaginable pressure and radiation. Grak's first and second arms held the plasma cutter steady, while his third and fourth arms worked frantically to brace the conduit, preventing it from buckling under the strain. One of his engineers, a young Kthar named Zor, screamed as a stray energy arc struck him, throwing him back into a bulkhead. Grak didn't hesitate. He shoved the plasma cutter into the arms of his remaining engineer. "Finish it," he roared, then turned and grabbed Zor, dragging him back to relative safety. The engineer was alive, but badly burned. Grak knew they were running out of time. The ship was groaning around them, and the plasma cloud was getting closer. He turned back to the conduit, his eyes narrowing with determination. He had to do this himself. He took the plasma cutter back, his four arms moving in a blur of coordinated motion. He aimed the cutter at the precise point he had identified, the microscopic fracture that was causing the cascade failure. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of ozone and fear. Then, with a final, decisive motion, he activated the cutter. A searing white-hot blade of plasma shot forth, slicing through the conduit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the energy that had been building up was released in a massive, controlled burst. The drive shuddered violently, but the screaming stopped. The containment field stabilized. Grak fell to his knees, exhausted, but a grim smile touched his lips. He had done it. The drive was saved. But as he looked up, he saw the view screen in the nearby engineering station, and his blood ran cold. The plasma cloud was still there, and it was still on a collision course with the ship. The cargo bay of the Odyssey was a cavern of silent power. Lena stood before a large, obsidian pedestal upon which rested the anchor. It was not an impressive object to look at, a simple, smooth stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. But Lena knew that within that stone was the concentrated will of its creator, a composer who had spent a lifetime understanding the fundamental forces of the universe. She had been authorized by Captain Vance to use it, but the responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. She approached the pedestal, her hands trembling slightly. She placed her hands on the stone, and it was as if she had plunged them into a pool of liquid gravity. She could feel the immense power, the potential to warp space-time itself. She closed her eyes, focusing her own will, her own understanding of physics, into the stone. She began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that was the key to unlocking the cord's power. As she hummed, the stone began to glow, a soft, golden light emanating from its core. The light spread out, filling the cargo bay, and Lena could feel the ship responding. The groaning and straining of the hull began to subside. She opened her eyes and looked at the view screen, her heart leaping with hope. The plasma cloud was still there, but the ship was no longer drifting helplessly. It was moving, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, pushing itself out of the cloud's path. The Odyssey was being saved by art, by the power of human imagination. Lena smiled, a rare and genuine expression of relief. But her triumph was short-lived. As she watched the view screen, she saw something else. A small, Kthar shuttle detaching from the Odyssey and speeding away from the ship. It was Grak's shuttle. He was leaving. Captain Vance watched the view screen in disbelief. The Odyssey was safe, pulled from the path of the plasma cloud by the sheer force of will represented by the anchor. But the celebration on the bridge was short-lived. Lena's voice came over the comms, her tone laced with confusion and anger. "Captain, you need to see this. Chief Engineer Grak, he's leaving. In his personal shuttle." Vance's blood ran cold. Grak, the simian engineer who had saved the ship's drive. He was just leaving? Without a word? It made no sense. He ordered the shuttle's trajectory to be displayed on the main view screen. There it was, a tiny speck of light, heading directly for the Weeping Veil Nebula. Open a channel to that shuttle, Vance commanded. Now. A moment later, Grak's face appeared on the view screen. He was bruised and singed, but his expression was one of grim resolve. Captain Vance, he said, his voice flat. I am leaving the ship. Why? Vance demanded, his voice tight. You saved us. You saved the ship. Why abandon us now? Grak's eyes narrowed. I did not save you. I saved my work. My drive. Your drive is in pieces, Vance shot back. We're in this together. Explain yourself. Grak's expression hardened. There is a together, and there is a together. Your art, it is a weapon. A dangerous, uncontrollable weapon. You used it to push the ship. What else will you use it for? To destroy? To conquer? I will not be a part of that. Before Vance could respond, Grak cut the transmission. The shuttle disappeared into the swirling mists of the nebula. Vance stood frozen, the weight of Grak's accusations settling on him like a shroud. He had used art to save them, but in doing so, he had confirmed the Kthar's worst fears about humanity. He had turned a masterpiece into a tool of survival, and now, an ally was gone, and a war was brewing. The shuttle plunged into the heart of the weeping veil, the nebula's gases swirling around it like angry ghosts. Grak gripped the controls, his four hands working in perfect harmony. He was not running away. He was chasing. He had seen something in the energy logs of the primary drive, a signature that was not human, not Kthar, but something else entirely. It was a faint, ancient signal, buried deep within the chaos of the failure. It was the reason for the cascade, the reason for the entire crisis. He had traced it to the nebula, and now he was following it. The nebula was treacherous, its radiation levels spiking to lethal levels. The shuttle's shields flared brightly, protesting the constant battering. Grak ignored the alarms, his focus absolute. He was an engineer, and engineers followed the data, no matter where it led. Finally, the nebula's gases began to thin, revealing a sight that stole the breath from his chest. Ahead of him, floating in the empty void, was an object of impossible geometry. It was a sphere of solidified light, constantly shifting and changing, yet retaining its perfect shape. It pulsed with an energy that was both beautiful and terrifying. It was the source of the signal, the thing that had sabotaged his drive. As he watched, the sphere began to change, its light coalescing into a shape, a form that was both familiar and alien. It was a being of pure energy, a creature of the nebula itself. It turned its attention to his shuttle, and Grak felt a presence in his mind, not a voice, but a feeling of immense, ancient curiosity. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was not an attack. It was a test, and humanity had just failed it. Captain Vance stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, the ship now stable and safe, but his mind was anything but. He stared at the view screen, which now showed the image of the energy being Grak had encountered. It was a being of pure light, a cosmic entity of unimaginable power. Lena stood beside him, her face pale. It's a first being, she whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. A creature that existed before the stars were born. It's not malevolent. It's inquisitive. It sees art, reality-bending art, as a form of communication. But when you used the anchor to push the ship, it didn't see communication. It saw violence.